Now I want to run through filter context. Now, as mentioned in the previous video, every DAX function or DAX formula is calculated in a two-step process. You first have the valuation context or the initial context, and then DAX makes a decision based on the function that you write what type of calculation it is then going to do post the initial context. And so it branches out into either filter context or row context. Now there is a very big difference between the two, even though you can actually get the same results by writing formula that is actually different. To really truly understand how DAX works, though, you need to understand the big difference and how things are actually calculated in memory through DAX. So with the filter context, now the filter context is relatively straightforward. It's relatively simple because it really aligns to aggregations that you do, simple aggregations. Now, to understand what is actually happening, let's run through a very specific example. So here we've got we've got two examples. We've got total quantity sold per day, and we've got total quantity sold per product. Exactly the same calculation, or exactly the same formula, sorry, but different evaluation context. Now let's walk through exactly how this is calculated for the very top row in each of these tables. Now in this case, if we jump to the data model, the first of the first 2015, we sold 24 products. Now for this calculation to work, a filter is placed on the date here for the 1st of January 2015. It then flows down through this relationship, down through this arrow, hits the sales table, and then this entire sales table, if we just jump to that table, this entire sales table, this purchase date is filtered for the 1st of the 1st 2015. And then when that filter is put in place, all that remains in this entire table will be the 1st of the 1st 2015. That's it. And then what that aggregation does in the filter context is it then goes and does this one big evaluation or big aggregation of the entire column, because we're summing up the quantity column in that function, right? And so what filter context means is it just means the filters are put in place, and then DAX goes and looks at the entire column that's left over, and then goes and does an aggregation of everything all at once. Okay, and then the same could be said for a variety of different calculations there. This is just one, right? But the same could be said if you were trying to count up the total transactions that you were doing or the total revenue that you were creating. Exactly the same aggregation is done on that after the evaluation context is completed. One tip that I like to think about is that filter, because there's so many contexts, it can get kind of confusing. What I do with try and do with filter context is I try to think aggregation. Okay, so if a filter context is being put on, then or we're using a sum or an average, a min, a max, then that's an aggregation. That's what I would classify as an aggregation. And that's opposed to an iteration, which is what works in with row context. So just to sum up, a filter context works after the initial evaluation context. The key is to think in your mind and associate it with an aggregation, and then really what is happening in behind the scenes is that it is looking at an entire column after all the filters have been put in place, and then it goes and does this one big aggregation of that column which is left over.